The splendor and the majesty of the great city of light, Paris, the capital of France. And if you look at this city, you'll find no shortage of profound structures with incredible geometric precision, and even geometric precision within the landscape. Go across the channel to London in the United Kingdom, the capital, and you'll see the same thing. Many incredible structures and an older geometric precision reflected in these structures and reflected in these explorations that we've done. But we've never looked at these cities in detail before. We're going to begin these explorations on the channel, concerning the account of these old world cities. But how old are they exactly? Could it be possible that they're much older than we could begin to realize? Join me as we explore the tale of two cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The opening line to the novel by Charles Dickens. And yet these cities have always been irrevocably linked, whether you accept the mainstream version of history or you simply accept the more recent history. Paris has incredible sights within it. It's known as being a romantic city. And yet how much detail is there within Paris alone? How many examples of old world architecture and structures can we find if we really begin to explore the city? I've often thought that an exploration of New York City in the United States would be difficult, but I'm coming to realize that these incredible capitals that we haven't looked at in great detail yet contain so many examples of incredible old world architecture, and not just in the structures but also in the landscape, in the very grid pattern of the streets that endures to this day. When were these structures constructed? When were these grid patterns laid out? Is it according to the mainstream account that we have of history that says that Paris came up and became the largest city in France from 900 to 1000? Is the Eiffel Tower's account that we have true? Or is there a completely different account behind the construction of the Eiffel Tower? How old are these structures on the banks of the Seine River? When was that dome actually constructed? Is it all as we understand it? There are so many alluring mysteries within the city of Paris, and yet so many more recent anomalies that we have. When was the Arch of Triumph really constructed? Why does it bear so many symbols that don't seem to reflect the period that it was stated to have been constructed in? Why do we have these decorative symbols, and what do they really mean? And why do they appear all over the land? And it should be noted that the Arch of Triumph isn't the only arch that we have in Paris. There are many arches across. And there's even this particular arch, although it's called a Soldiers and Sailors Arch, and this is in Brooklyn in the United States. Yet, oddly enough, it bears a very striking resemblance to the arch that we just looked at in Paris. So what's the real story behind all of these overlapping consistencies? Does this indicate that there was a civilization that connected these lands, despite being separated by a vast ocean? And looking in other places, we see that Paris is starting to be modernized. It's fallen to urban renewal. We'll of course be informed that urban renewal is necessary. It's a sign of progress. And going across the English Channel to London, we see the same thing. Old world structures mixed with the current era or modern architecture. Whether you want to call it postmodern, brutalist, or whatever mix that we have, or functional, as the more euphemistic term comes for it, we still see the same thing that we see in Paris, France. We see the older, incredible structures that still endure, and yet they seem to be blotted out by the more modern structures. Except, of course, for St. Paul's Cathedral, an incredible edifice that still dominates the skyline of London, despite the fact that there are many other newer structures around it. For whatever reason, they just don't seem to compare to this older edifice that was constructed in the mid-1600s to the early 1700s. So what are we really looking at when we concern ourselves with these two cities? Why are they so intrinsically linked? Is it beyond the story of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens? I am Sir Henry Simerson. I have a cousin in Horse Guards and friends in court. And the man who loses the king's colors loses the king's friendship. You look across, though, at places such as Trafalgar Square, and you can still see much of the old world architecture that continues to endure to this day. You can also get examples of an infrastructure that seems to have been developed in the distant past. Now, it is true that the official historical account does account for this. Both London and Paris were the largest respective cities of their nations, from 900 to 1,000, depending on your view of official history. And yet here, when we look at the incredible Westminster Palace, we have another account of a previous Westminster Palace, and you'll never guess what happened to it. That's right, it went up in a fire. Cause I'm beginning to get a sense of deja vu here. So why is it that we have these same stories? Let's take a look at London from the 1800s. We have images of London from a book that was assembled for Queen Victoria, or at least it was considered Queen Victoria's London, as part of the Victorian era in the 1890s. And you can find this book, and perhaps you can look at these images yourself, and for the low price of 172 quid or a couple $100, it could be yours. But again, you see the examples of the enduring architecture, and how old is it really? Shouldn't it be brand new at this particular time, as a lot of the city was constructed in the 1800s? When you look through many of these images, though, you tend to see interesting anomalies, whether it's with the way people or animals appear and the way certain buildings appear. Can we take these images at face value, or have they been altered? Not necessarily altered intentionally, but altered because of the fact that the original photographs had to be reprinted and put into the book in the 1890s. And what kind of technology did they have available for that time? How good were they at actually capturing the photos? Well, when you look closely, it looks like everything adds up. You have individuals and animals, horse and buggy, and yet with that you have this very incredible structure with portal windows, pediments, and columns. And a very interesting looking flag here in this particular image. Not exactly sure what's going on with this flag, or is it Linus's blanket from Charlie Brown? Whatever the situation is with it, we look at other images and we can see how this view compared in the past, in the 1890s, to a modern view seeing St. Paul's Cathedral in the distance. And we, for some reason, have the appearance almost of a larger city in the past. Perhaps that's just the effect of looking at a monochromatic photo. And yet when you look closely at some other individuals in other photos from this book, sometimes there seems to be something a little bit amiss with them. I'm not really sure what it is. Again, it could simply be because of a limitation in how they copied the photos or how they transposed the photos to the book. I mean, it was a book made for Queen Victoria, but ultimately it was for the public to consume or purchase, or however you want to state it. But you'll see that the many great structures are captured within, and it gives you an impression of just how astounding London was during the Victorian era. And yet again, we see the same anomalies that we do when we look at all the cities in the United States and elsewhere across the land. We see a civilization that seems to be somewhat limited in its logistical capacity, such as in this particular image where we see horse and buggies traveling on a dirt-covered road. Now, it may be possible that that's a cobblestone road, it's a paved road, and it's just covered with dirt from all the horses and everything. I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. But you look at this impressive row of structures going all the way to the Great Dome in the distance. And once again, we have incredible lions. Lions all over the place. Again, that makes sense, though, as the lion is well known to be a symbol of heraldry and reflecting many other things, and so that's not so anomalous in and of itself. But seeing the horse and carts and then comparing this incredible view of St. Paul's Cathedral, again constructed in the mid-1600s to the early 1700s, and we'll look at it in detail. What exactly is going on with the clouds in this particular image? I'm not really sure. Again, is it just the way that the photo was copied? Something about it almost seems to lack a realism. And then you see these interesting buildings, and I'm reminded of the small shacks that surrounded the Iowa State Capitol back in Iowa. And yet, looking at other images, we can see that there is no shortage of very well-constructed and well-decorated structures during this particular time frame. So it's not just royal palaces or Westminster or anything such as that, or even Buckingham Palace. We have structures all over the city with domes and columns and pediments and what exactly is going on with these individuals here as we look closely? I'm not exactly sure. Are we looking at some sort of interesting type of human being from the 1800s? Or is it just, again, a limitation with the technological capability at the time to copy the photograph? I've got to admit, though, I'm glad that my horse doesn't appear like that horse. I might have a lot of difficulty riding. So after looking at that, let's take another look at the building from this same photograph. Now, is the building appearing as it should? Or do you see any anomalies with the structure itself? And oddly enough, the structure to the right reminds me of the great church that we looked at in Cincinnati so long ago. Still, we see no end to these endless structures with the columns and the foundation stones, the stairs, and a lot of the fine detail that goes into it. What exactly is happening, though, with these interesting marks that are on the side of these blocks? What did these come from? Was this from a fire? Was it from coal? Yes, I'm well aware there used to be a nickname for London calling it Smoke City. But if that's the case, then how come every city in the 1800s wasn't called Smoke City? Since everybody was burning coal, or so we're informed. Or could there be a different account? This is a very interesting image. I don't even know if I would consider this a full photograph, and perhaps it had to be augmented in some way in order to make the book. But looking at this particular structure a little more closely, again, I have more questions than answers. It's very interesting when we really start to analyze these 1800s images, what we have. And of course, looking more closely at the people on the ground. Again, what's going on? And I certainly invite you to let me know what you think in the comments. And once again, I'm glad that my horse doesn't appear like that. I would probably have a lot of trouble riding. Here, though, at the Royal Stock Exchange, we see an image that reminds us of the exact same things in the United States, such as Federal Hall in New York City. Another pediment with columns, and of course this is because everybody was building in the neoclassical style. It was the thing to do, and it was the only way that anybody really wanted to build, even though Rome had been gone for well over 1,000 years at this time. I will say that in this particular image, it seems like we have slightly more, maybe I'll just say 1900s appearing people, and maybe it was a slightly later image, although they're all stated to be from the exact same book. So as I'm fond of saying, make of it as you will. But you can see, though, that the city is very populated, at least. Or is it? Is there something more going on with these images that we have of people and animals? Ah, yes, the great Crystal Palace. Of course, they managed to get a couple images of the Crystal Palace. And one thing I didn't really cover when discussing the Crystal Palace in the live stream exploration that we did and the subsequent explorations is just the amount of artwork that seems to be all around the grounds. And yet, looking at these photos, you can certainly ask questions. Now, this particular photo comes from the 1930s. It's one of the last aerial photos that was taken of the Crystal Palace prior to its untimely demise, again at the hands of another fire in the 1930s. So you can see that the trials and tribulations of fire accompany specific buildings at all times. I still wonder what exactly was the situation with these towers. And I know what the official historical account says, but I'm wondering. Seeing this old image of Tower Bridge in London certainly inspires the imagination. And we have the account of how the actual London Bridge was bought by a chainsaw magnate in Arizona and moved to Lake Havasu, Arizona. But there are accounts that said that he thought he was buying this, Tower Bridge. Of course, how would one go about moving Tower Bridge across an ocean? It sounds like an absurd notion. Of course, I would claim that moving any bridge across the ocean is an absurd notion. Again, we have another one of these very interesting photographs with odd things with the sky and the structure itself. Now, again, I invite you, what do you think about this in the comments when you see structures like this? And yet it seems to be mixed with photos such as this that do seem to give us a little bit more of a real impression. Do we really need to put a lot more effort in questioning these photos? Or do we simply need to realize that there were vast limitations in the technological capability at the time? Maybe some photographers had more advanced cameras than others. Maybe there was more dedication to the development process on certain photos. Although I'd like to think if they were making a picture book for the Queen after her effective rule of many decades, they would go to the effort to have nothing but the finest pictures. Especially given how much effort they had put into gaining pictures of certain other things, such as these very impressive structures. And look at this interesting bridge or skywalk or whatever you want to call it, and unique symbols on it. Looking again, though, we focus in on the people in this particular image and the animals in the carts, and again we see some very interesting details. I often wonder, is what we see really what life was like in the 1800s? Now, what do I really mean by that? It always seems to have been so busy and so bustling, and we certainly have no shortage of videos that prove this. And of course, here we have London Bridge, the one that was moved to Lake Havasu in Arizona. Official accounts state that only the blocks were moved, and they were used as a facade around a new structure that was constructed in Lake Havasu. And don't try to make sense of that, because how could you have a bridge that was developed for use in London work in a desert? It worked, all right? That's all you need to know. But looking at these other images, though, we do see certain items that we may have seen in other cities. For some reason, I'm being reminded of certain fountains that I've seen in Germany when I look at this particular structure and this very interesting structure in front of it. Now, we're not focused on details quite yet. We're just looking at the city as a whole. And yet, when you look at the great clock towers, when you look at all the detail, a lot of these structures, virtually most of them, still endure to this day. So it's safe to say that they were built to last, and perhaps that's one of the most appealing things about visiting Paris or London to this day, is that you can still see many of these structures, and they are officially claimed to be hundreds of years old. Now, why do we have this question about the actual age of London or Paris? The interesting thing is when you look at the original maps, the oldest maps available of these cities, you don't see the sign of geometric precision. In other words, the star forts are lacking, or what we call star forts are lacking. There are some images in Paris that give you the impression, but certainly not in London. And we still have our large and grand columns all over the place, because again, we're trying to be like Romans. What exactly is this in the 1890s? Very odd image here. What are your thoughts on this particular close-up? But seeing other things, we can certainly get the idea that some of the photos were subjected to damage, and perhaps that was from the original processing that came about, and I certainly don't want to discount that. It's just very intriguing to look at original images of any city anywhere, because I think oftentimes you get conflicting accounts within the photos themselves. Now, you ultimately have to decide. Is what you're seeing in the photo a real representation of what was actually going on? Or is it only a partial representation? I'm not suggesting any sort of conspiracy or effort for a cover-up or anything like that. No, heaven forfend. I'm merely suggesting that perhaps there were some limitations at the time that prevented them from getting an accurate picture of pants and shoes. Well, you also have this incredible Cleopatra's Needle in London. And Cleopatra's Needle is quite intriguing because there's not only one in London, but there's also one in New York City, in Central Park to be specific. So let's look at the account of Cleopatra's Needles. And this is the one in Central Park, New York City. That's still there to this day, as is the one in London. And you can see that the official account tells us that these originally came from Egypt. Yes, in the early 1870s, or the late 1860s, early 1870s, both were moved. And Henry Honeychurch Gorringe, a U.S. naval officer who served in the Civil War, was the one who came up with the plan to move the one to New York City in the United States. He doesn't really have anything notable, and I don't mean to denigrate his service in the Civil War, but all he's known for is moving Cleopatra's Needle from Egypt to the United States. Quite intriguing. And he's also known for discovering a mountain range in the Atlantic. And, of course, it was by technology that was innovated by Lord Kelvin here. You might recall Lord Kelvin was the individual who helped complete the original transatlantic telegraph, and we explored that. Ah, yes, so many connections. We do have some pictures that show the transportation of the incredible obelisk, although, again, are there any issues with these pictures? I'm quite fascinated that a 200-ton granite obelisk was moved so easily. Now, there is an account that this naval officer came up with this plan to move it all the way from Egypt and then erect it in Central Park in New York City. Although, is this actually the obelisk that we see in the picture, or is this merely a wood mock-up of an obelisk? I mean, I wasn't there, I don't know. Maybe they had to put wood around the obelisk, I'm not really sure. It is rather odd, though, that we seem to have limited documentation behind this impressive feat. And we have this U.S. naval officer who served during the Civil War, although it just stated that he rose up through the ranks and then the Civil War ended. And he's most known for coming up with this plan for erecting this obelisk. Of course, after he discovered the mountain range underwater using technology that was innovated by Lord Kelvin, a British genius at the time. And I'm not seeing any of the same images with this particular photograph that we saw earlier, and I certainly don't see any issues with the crowd here. I'm sure you don't either. I mean, look at the trees in the sky. Of course, we'll be informed, is this a photograph? Is this an artistic rendering of a photograph? Is it something else? This is where things start to get a little bit blurred in our understanding. Did it really happen? Well, we're told it really happened. But why don't we have a more obvious photograph? I mean, this is probably a little bit closer, but again, much like with many construction photos, you see a curious lack of workers. So are we to accept the fact that this machinery or this apparatus that they were using was automated in some way, shape, or form? I'm always reminded of watching the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. It should also be noted that our U.S. naval officer that pulled this off was part of the American Philosophical Society, founded in 1743. Ah, yes, we use the terminology appropriately there. And he died shortly after erecting the obelisk. Again, another sense of deja vu, a story that we keep hearing. But here it is today in all its glory, Cleopatra's Needle in Central Park in New York City that you can still go and see to this day. Now, is it impossible that they moved a 200-ton structure such as this obelisk across the ocean? No. But is it very difficult to fathom? Yes. Just as difficult as it's to fathom that they have one that they moved from Egypt to London, the United Kingdom. Also, when you read about the background of the political situation, Egypt already had the Suez Canal, but the leader was indebted to the United States and the United Kingdom, or so we're informed, and therefore decided to gift them these obelisks. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? I guess he didn't have the idea to nationalize the Suez Canal just yet. Oh yes, it includes some sphinxes too. Or are those lions, or are those something else? Well, I'm not going to make any suggestions. Let's take a look at Paris in the 1800s. And so what do we see in Paris that compares and contrasts with what we just looked at in London? Well, we do have no shortage of images or photographs that show busy streets, and what an impressive and advanced-looking tower this is. For some reason, I'm reminded of the Cathedral of Learning when we looked at Pittsburgh. And what an interesting statue all the way on the top of it. And I'm trying to fathom exactly when this was constructed and what sort of effort went into it. We do see, though, the same sign of streets that are covered with dirt, and again, perhaps we could explain that by the fact that there were only animals and carts going around at that time. But then you look at this very impressively constructed bridge, and even the lights on it. Again, another strange contrast. Not to say it suggests anything. We also have a variety of images from Paris that show completely empty streets, such as the Arch of Triumph here. Now, why exactly are the streets empty? I'm not suggesting that it proves anything. Perhaps you could say it was just due to limitations in the photographic technology again. But again, you see these very impressive structures, multiple portal windows, multiple figures, and of course in our recent explorations in symbolism, and then of course symbology, the study of the meaning of symbols, we have to ask, what exactly did they mean? Well, we can always attribute this as being affiliated with France, but was it really? I mean, we're informed that it was. It has to be. It's in France, right? Of course, you see similar images that really seem to connect both Paris and France during the Victorian era, or the 1800s. And indeed, one could understand how you could confuse both locations at the time. There are many similarities. And yet, looking at the great rivers and the original infrastructure, the bridges and the embankments and all the effort that went into it, the official explanation will be, well, they had hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years, from declaring these cities as the largest cities in their respective nations. And this is where the monarchies at the time of both nations decided to actually set up shop, or where the term seat of government came from. But you look at some of the incredible achievements in Paris, and the photos, if taken at face value, prove that they were there from the 1860s to the 1890s, just as they proved in the 1890s that many of the great structures were in London. But looking closely, we see some individuals, and again, what really to make of some of these images? Are there other details in them that seem, maybe I'll just say, a little unique? Or maybe just completely odd? Here we go. At least Paris has its own version of an obelisk as well. Well, we always have to have an obelisk in every city. And I'm surprised we don't have some very elaborate account of how this obelisk was, again, brought from Egypt. Apparently there were so many obelisks in Egypt that everybody wanted to get their hands on them and move them everywhere. It certainly couldn't be that anybody would think of building an obelisk in their own nation or trying to do it. We would think they'd have the capability to do it, given the fact that they did, we're informed, build all these incredible buildings in Paris and these bridges. Another interesting account is that Paris was so critical for defending from Viking raids because the bridges kept the Vikings from heading down south on the river. How intriguing. Those Vikings. They were everywhere and they were such a nuisance all the way back in the day. But in the end, they were eventually overcome. Of course, it depends on how you actually read and interpret the history. What exactly is going on here? What is this supposed to be a depiction of? What are your thoughts on this particular image? What do you think this is really showing? And then, of course, in addition to our great obelisk, we also have many great columns. Large and impressive columns with unique symbols on them, much like we see elsewhere. And again, if we were in the United States, this would probably be the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Column, much like it's the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Arch in Brooklyn. And speaking of arches, we got a very impressive arch here with some incredible detail on it. And again, these photos, for whatever reason, just seem to make all of these structures appear colossal, looking at the scale between the structure itself and the individual on the ground. Now again, could that just simply be some sort of effect at looking at these images? I'm not sure. And once again, we have another empty street photograph. Now what's this really proving? Is it possible that the photographer went out and took a photo when there was nobody out on the streets? That's entirely possible. We've had recent events that would give us an indication in terms of why that would happen. Perhaps there was some very good reason that people were given a mandate to stay off the streets, and they had to abide by that mandate. It's always intriguing, though, to look at what's supposed to be relatively recent architecture appearing very old in these old photographs. I mean, whether it's something that was constructed only a few decades or even 25 to 30 years, we wouldn't expect it to appear so old. Of course, you could always say, well, it's because everybody was burning coal then, there was a lot of dust in the air for reasons unknown, and the skies are gray for some reason. Not really sure what to make of it, but it's what we tend to see when we look at all these older images. Now again, am I still willing to entertain the possibility that they just had limitations in photographic technology? Absolutely. I wasn't there, I don't know what cameras they used, and I don't know what development processes they used. And yes, you can find it in books where somebody, probably not the photographer, recorded how they did it. But of course, we look at some of these very famous structures that are extremely well known, and again, it appears as though they've been around for quite some time. There's accounts of many of these cathedrals across Europe that took hundreds of years to construct. But just thinking about that, does that really make the most sense? Is it possible? What exactly do all these symbols allude to here in this particular structure in Paris? And is this something that we'd expect to see? Are there places in the United States where we've seen similar symbols, even though they don't necessarily make a lot of sense? And then, of course, the continuous empty streets. And you would expect, at least, that if there were people on the streets and the photographic technology simply didn't capture them, or it required a long exposure time, we'd at least see blurs or something. It's just so many different anomalies when you try to ponder these images. And yet you see this stellar architecture. I mean, at least here we have a horse and cart in this particular image, but then we have these advanced lights and we have this very, very impressive architecture and this structure with incredible artistic detail on it. And I will admit, one of the things that I enjoyed in Ridley Scott's Napoleon movie was being able to see some of that French architecture from that time frame, or at least architecture that's attributed to the French, and that's what the official history says, being able to see it up close and personal. In fact, I'll admit that's probably what I enjoyed most about that particular film. But that's just my opinion, take it or leave it. And here it looks as though we have another version of Trajan's column here. Oh, yes. I always think back to that comparison image I did in the early days of the channel where we looked at Trajan's column in the building it was in front of and then compared it to the Iowa State Soldier and Sailors Monument and Iowa State Capitol in the background. The grounds, though, on France are quite impressive, and there's unbelievable geometric precision in the layout. And you might notice on the thumbnail we have the very famous aerial image of the overhead of the Arch of Triumph, and the way all the streets seem to circuit right into it. Of course, this is not the only particular landmark where this phenomenon occurs. So again, infinite grounds with infinite construction materials, stated to have been done over a period of hundreds of years. And we have explored Paris in the past when we considered our exploration of the catacombs. And yet when you see images like this, you get an idea of some of the very elaborate and ornate detail, just in this particular bridge. How come we don't have an account of some American chainsaw entrepreneur wanting to purchase this bridge and move it to the United States? Well, perhaps they couldn't have built a steel skeleton structure that would have supported it. Where have we seen these symbols before? What exactly is this alluding to? Very, very intriguing. What are your thoughts on it? And as if that's not enough, we also have lions down here. Once again, the same symbols seen everywhere. Everybody who's into their lions, their dragons, their creatures. You know the creature, I'm not going to say it, but you know the one I'm talking about. And last but not least, we have this very interesting image of a public toilet in Paris. Ah yes, the most ornate, detailed, and decorated public toilet you'll ever see in the history of your life. Why do they only have one though? Wasn't the city more populated than that? What are your thoughts on this public toilet? I wanted to take a close look at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and I thought it would be time to be joined by an individual I know in the UK who I've worked with before. We'll be joined by special guest Donnie P. from NMM Podcastio. I came across Donnie about a year ago when he invited me to appear on his podcast, and you can certainly look up the podcast on your own, and I advise you to do so, as he does many wonderful podcast explorations with many different alternative researchers, and looks at a variety of topics. He does wondrous research, and he puts a lot of thought into everything he does, and I can certainly recommend his podcast channel, especially if you're looking for other perspectives. And perhaps the most important thing is he has a wonderful open mind and considers all perspectives. And I'd like to greet Donnie and welcome him to the Restitutor Orbis channel. It's great to see you again, and thank you for joining us on the Lucius Aurelian channel.
Yeah, thank you for having me here, brother. Always appreciate being here because it's a wonderful place to be. Thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful. London was even stated to be the largest city in the world, especially during the Victorian era of the late 1800s.
It is, it's strange with London because you have it's almost like a trinity, almost. You have this greater London area, you have the normal London, and then you've got the 1 square mile inside that London. There's a different London.
The other thing that always interested me, though, was the conflicting account with how London and the greater metropolitan area were affected, or rather not affected, by the Great Depression. I always found that very, very intriguing, because you go to different lands at different times and people will tell you, well, the Great Depression didn't really affect us here. For example, just did the exploration in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and a lot of people will say, Spain wasn't affected by the Great Depression. Okay. But you had that little civil war going on. So, still credible achievements with the civil war going on. But London, they inform us, was not affected too terribly by the Great Depression. And I mean, did people talk about it there? Was it something discussed in school about how awful the Great Depression was? What's the collective memory from your recollection on the Great Depression affecting not just London, but the greater area in Great Britain, United Kingdom?
Yeah, the Great Depression. I mean, people throwing themselves out of buildings, bro. It was so deep. The thing is, when in reference to it not affecting London too badly, is the fact that, again, the 1 square mile in London isn't London. and this is a completely sovereign state. So for them, it's like the Great Depression. Where's that? I'm looking for this depression, can't find it. It's not affecting these people, and it's like the same now. Like the distribution of wealth in the UK is wild. The further up north you go, oh my God, there's nothing. It's barren, it's rural. There is stuff there, but you can tell. And then you go to London, it's like, whoa, like there's so much money there now. And I don't know in terms of, are they still teaching this stuff? Like obviously through history, they'll teach, about, they teach a lot about World War II, disproportionate amount, I'd say. Different show maybe, but but the Great Depression, I'm not entirely sure how much they teach the kids still, but you can tell. I think what it did is maybe London got hit so hard, like the people around there were like, right, we're hoarding all this money now, we're keeping all this money, we ain't losing it again. You know what I mean?
Oh, beyond any shadow of a doubt. And it's interesting because you have a similar geographical municipal arrangement when you consider the cities of Washington, D.C. and the Vatican in the middle of Rome. You've got these multiple political entities, and even in the case where they technically fall under the same federal government, it's all very unique and at best highly questionable. And I'm glad you mentioned that detail with London, because I think a lot of people, especially individuals who haven't been there, typically it's not something you're made aware of, not very consciously aware of anyway.
Not even here. You're not even made aware of. You have to learn that here. No one tells you. They don't teach that at school. I know they don't. I went to school. They never told me. It's wild. It is. And again, like with the three sovereign states, Trinity, again, there's a lot of Trinities. And I mean, I don't want to go too deep into it now. Good time and place, and they'll come after us, on the algorithm. But there's a different sovereign, in my opinion, there's a different sovereign state for a certain thing. There's one for war, there's one for, beliefs, let's just say, and there's one for finance. And you can pretty much tell where they are,
Yeah, and I don't think it's anything that's led to be any sort of hidden levels. I mean, we're quite brazenly made aware of it in some respects, and then just casually referred to it in other respects. And then many things, like you just mentioned, are never stated at all, but they exist in reality. It's quite fascinating the way that does break down in those three ways. So I thought we would first focus on St. Paul's Cathedral. And St. Paul's in the city of London caught my attention because it has all the classical marks of our old world architecture. For one, like just about every cathedral across Europe, it was a successor to a previous cathedral. The previous cathedral burned down in a fire. And of course, we had the Great Fire in London in 1666, which was caused by some unfortunate accident, or if you watch Doctor Who, by some alien playing his machinations, but whatever. Had the nasty fire. And then, of course, they state that they built this very incredible and beautiful cathedral that, quite frankly, to me, resembles, federal capital, a state capital in the United States. I mean, this could very easily be any one of your state capitals, Capital Texas, Pennsylvania, or something along that effect. I mean, a lot of people, when you just show them St. Paul's Cathedral, especially Americans, they tend to tell you, oh, what capital is that? What state is that? Where is that? Oh, no, that's St. Paul's Cathedral. That's in London. And so when people tell you that, when they respond that particular way, it really gives you the implication that there is a great similarity in architecture when there should not be, especially if we go off the official account of when they built this incredible beauty, which, of course, was in the 1600s. 1675 to 1710 is when they say they built this magnificent and marvelous structure. Thoughts on that?
So, in terms of, what was the date again?
1675 to 1710. That's what they officially tell us.
Yeah. So for me, looking at, first of all, you have the dome, this Greco-Roman-esque looking dome, and I don't understand why. See, here's the thing, and I always like to be logical. Did they go over to the US with this in mind from our friend Christopher Wren and say, like, we're going to build these capitals like this, in reference to the one at St. Paul's? Normally the answer is no, that's not the case, because there's so many inconsistencies, it's impossible for it to be the case. But straight after the fire, it's the same thing as Dresden. Most of Korea, like, just completely destroy the architecture, like with a quote unquote fingers in the air, air quotes, fire, which, if you look at a lot of the photos that are left, it's clearly not a fire. If you use your brain, you can see that there's trees that are there that are apparently fireproof, and then you have, like, it looks like things have melted. There's no sign of burning. It looks like rubble. It's like, well, this isn't meant to be a fire that a cow kicked over a lantern, that type of stuff, It doesn't make any sense. And then why build this in a Greco-Roman style, like, for a start? Like, I just don't understand. When the surrounding architecture, not that there was much, there was obviously considerably less, but yeah, maybe they were, exploring, just messing about with styles, like, oh, this felt cute, might delete later, that sort of thing. But I don't see that as a possibility, really. You don't waste and invest that much time in something as beautiful as that and as elaborate as that for, just trying out something new.
No, absolutely right. And referring to what you would think would be the lineage or the succession of architecture, so they say that they built this 1675 to 1710. So that means that if the historicity, in other words, it's true exactly as they tell us, then they had this knowledge of building. Architects could do this. They had the plans for this. The United States, after the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War, they build their federal capitals. But you'll find that the original federal capital and the original state capitals had very different domes on them. It looked nothing like this. It was not really until the mid-1800s, according to the official account in the United States, that they started building domes exactly like this. It's very peculiar. In fact, even going off of the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C., they replaced the original dome. Oh, and they did it during the United States Civil War, because apparently that's an easy time when you've got all kinds of money and there's nothing else you're worried about, like getting your capital captured by an invading army from a successor state. Then, that's when you do stuff like that. But it's really bizarre, because it doesn't make any sense. If they had this knowledge, well, we're not actually going to build like that. We're going to build a different kind of dome. And who knows on the historicity of those original domes in the United States? It's got the same issue with all the other old images that we have.
That was funny. I could just imagine, like, during a civil war, like, all these soldiers running towards you, like, bayonets. You're like, hang on a minute, mate, I've just got to change this roof. Do you know what I mean? I've just got to fix this dome. Like, you fuck off a minute. Oh, bleep that out. Sorry, bro. But yeah, there's normally, like, there's so many inconsistencies with these stories, like, time-wise, but not time-wise, like, time-wise on a scale of, like, how long it's built, obviously, to be, use the simple one, but also when these things were taking place, being built, like you said, like, during the Civil War, like things being, like, like, built on top. Now, you could say, yeah, but it was heavily fortified around the outside, so they were, relatively safe, and they could, allow the time to fix this. But I just think those people that are using a hammer up there fixing this roof could be using this hammer on a soldier that's coming over to kill your family. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, and it gets even more bizarre when you look at the account in the United States, because the United States Civil War was the first time the United States fielded a large national army. Oh, and they did it when half the nation was in open rebellion, and oddly enough, that's what they call it. And not to get off on that tangent, but yes, it's that same story. When your resources are strained to the breaking point, that's when you pull off all these incredible architectural achievements that we can't pull off now, despite the fact that we have a unified nation. We have infinite funds, because there seems to be no limit on how much debt we can go into. So don't tell me we've got a limit on debt. And that's not controversial to say, because why do we keep going into debt? Well, because reasons, you know. I mean, there's obviously no limit behind it. And I look at the paintings of this, you know, and this is what we have, you know. Here, 1754 looks exactly the same. Here in 1896, you know, we've obviously got a sketch here, looks exactly the same, but you still have that same impression, yeah, Roman Greco, and yet here it survives the Blitz as though it weren't even targeted. You know, I remember your exploration you did of Oxford and how Oxford was not targeted. Why is that? I don't know. Or was it targeted and, you know, none of the munitions they had could actually do anything to it? Who knows for sure? I mean, of course, they tell us it wasn't targeted. I mean, was there any damage to St. Paul's? It's really odd when you look into the account about it. And not just St. Paul's, but then the other cathedrals across Europe.
Yeah. It's like they've almost like got it sussed out. Like, destroy that stuff, but make sure you don't destroy this stuff. You know, we've got to keep this stuff. It is anything that is built by Christopher Wren, we're keeping that. That's don't drop any bombs on that. Oh, it's laughable, really.
Well, you know, and that's a great observation you make, though, because there's probably a very intentional reason. It's almost as though they would like to destroy these structures. I think we could make the supposition that structures such as St. Paul's Cathedral in London, the Iowa State Capitol, and many, many others, they would love to pull them down. But I think there's some reason that we don't know that they cannot pull these structures down, that it will disrupt something that we're not aware of, that it will cause some sort of complication or some sort of who knows what kind of massive disruption. You know, I don't want to speculate in terms of the severity of the consequences, but there seems to be some limitation on why they cannot pull these structures down, aside from maybe they really just cannot pull them down. They lack the means.
Ooh, I like that. Maybe. Now, this is pure speculation, and I'm a very logical guy, but a lot of these things have those like cathode rod things. They call them cathedrals and all this stuff, this energy harnessing stuff. I don't know how true it is. I've seen some stuff that I've, you know, sort of seen, and I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Could that be the case? But is it that they need these things to harness that energy? Because energy is, here's the thing, like the energetic world is like 99.99999% of what it actually is, and all this physical stuff is just a passing event. But is it the case that, see all these people, they're all praying, they all got their hands together, they're praying to their God or whatever, and instead of that going to their God in veneration, it's being harnessed? Because energy, you know, attention, you know, energy flows where attention goes. So is it being captured? And that's where they're like, don't destroy this, because this is, you know, this is our louche in a way, you know. And that's why all of our ones, like, they destroy the Korean ones and that, like, get that out of it. All the other ones, but like all the ones maybe with the domes, like, keep them ones because they're good for harnessing the energy. I don't know, maybe.
No, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I mean, when you really look in the interior and you take in the volume of space, that's what always gets me about these old world buildings, you know, whether we call it a cathedral, a capitol, or whatever. Just this massive volume of space that no one would ever use. And here you have it in St. Paul's, with these incredible massive arches and construction stylings that look far more advanced. And yes, of course, we notice there's a nice little checkerboard floor, you know, nice little decorative detail, right?
Yeah. That's something that I think of sometimes. Now, obviously, it's the case of, you know, these things are resonators, you know, where as the energy, the sound vibrations move around, they create, people speculate they create healing, you know, and that's where you go there to heal, you know, back in the day, because they weren't built for, you know, any certain religion. You know, they were built before that for other things by different cultures that knew about all this acoustic healing stuff and energetic healing. But what I would say is, if it was for what they say it is for, surely you'd be like, you know, that we could at least put some other floors in here, because there's so much space just going straight up. And I know it's beautiful, but we need to think practically. You know, we're human beings, we're trying to evolve all the time. You know, we're very conscious of, you know, like keeping stuff and like innovating and stuff. Why wouldn't we put some more floors in there? I know it's a weird tangent, but like it's just something that I thought. It's like, why is that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting thought, unless, the intention is the function with why you have this vast amount of voluminous open space within these structures. And on that note, we're taking a look at their wonderful organ that they have in all of these kinds of structures. And of course, they'll say it's the church organ, but again, there's something more advanced about a lot of these organs, and even their complexity, and the fact that, well, who do I go and talk to if I want to get a massive organ like this made today? Do you think we could do it? If we wanted to get a nice organ like this installed in our house, would that be possible?
Exactly. I think when it comes to these organs, maybe they're tuned at 432 hertz. Maybe. I don't know that for sure, but I would say that if this place, these cathedrals, whatever you want to call them, were created for healing purposes, energetically, then that bad boy there blasting out 432 hertz straight at your face while you're sat there with your hands praying in that's, I mean, even like when the sound comes, like you feel it resonating in you. It's like the sound, the om sound. So I do that a lot. You can feel it resonating, and when you hear these organs, and it's funny that they're called organs. It's funny that it's the organ of the church or the organ of the cathedral. Like, what a strange name. It's got nothing to do with, like, an organ. It's a little bit like a piano. Doesn't sound anything like piano. Doesn't sound anything like keyboard. Not that keyboards existed. But it's like, why do they call it an organ? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, great detailed observation. And we don't know. We can certainly theorize about the fact that perhaps that was the essential component of the apparatus. In other words, all these wonderful things that these cathedrals could do with their original function. I mean, just did an exploration on immortality that came out today, and distant longevity that we had in the past, which just about every single religion believes and states that people lived longer in the past. Even though our mainstream researchers work to deride it. But we've got accounts of people living hundreds of years if you look in the Bible. But then if you look in the religion of Jain Dharma in India, they'll tell you that people live for millions of years. Even though that's way beyond the evolution of humans from Cro-Magnons and blah, 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 blah. But if you think about that, if you had structures like this, and of course, we're only talking about the civilization that preceded ours, where we probably have accounts of people living for hundreds of years, and maybe that's what we actually see in the Bible, then what if this is somehow a way that renewed the physical and spiritual well-being of those people, and that's what this device served, and one of the many functions that this cathedral, although really if you think about it, this building likely had multiple purposes that it had, that's what the people went there for. And now, of course, it continues to this day that, yes, it's where you go and you pray and you venerate and you show your piety, and that's what we've converted them into. Although, oddly enough, stadiums, and we have older stadiums, we explored that before, they, oddly enough, serve a similar purpose.
And you've just reminded me of something really deep. So, these places have this energetic quality, and inside the, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about it, yeah, the North African country with an E, those three things that are aligned to, that star formation, the belt. But inside there, they're said to be in the king's chamber or whatever. But they're said to have this energetic potency that if you attempted to sometimes you don't even have to attempt to out of body astral project. You just come straight out. You're like, but some people get stuck there. But this thing, this organ, I could imagine that resonating in a way that induces the vibrational state. And then from there, if you do it right and you stay relaxed and stuff like that, then you come out of body. I haven't got there yet. I haven't got out of body yet. I got the vibrations, but I got scared. But is that I'm interested to know if these places are like astral airports. So groups of people go there and they get hit with this. They're going there intentionally, maybe, and they all go there to have these out of body experiences, to astral project, and they go there and they come out of body, and then they go to wherever they need to go, and they know that it's like parking and ride. They leave their body there. They go off, explore the universe, come back. Open up the body, jump in, drive home. Is it that too?
Yeah, I think you may be onto something there. And I don't know if you ever saw the film They Live with John Carpenter. There's a very brief scene where they show the quote-unquote aliens, or whatever you want to think of them as, their travel mechanism. And it looked very much like that. They're converted into energy, and they're blasted off to some other portion of the land, the realm, whatever you want to call it. Very interesting. And, think about that, if they really had that capacity. And why do they always call them portals in these cathedrals, these large doors? Well, if you need to pass a lot of people through, and if they're actually being transported to some other sort of physical location, perhaps in lands we can't reach, that would be the means to do it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You got to open yourself up to the astral, man. Everything points back to the astral. I look at this stuff like there was this, I know it's not London related, but there was I swear it's in South America, that there was this myth of people walking up to these certain places and like touching or putting something on these doorways that were bricked up. So they weren't real doorways, they were carved in, and they just disappeared. That's like physical teleportation. That's not even like astral projection. But these certain places, these really significant places, maybe that's why they keep them, because they know that they could do it easily. They don't have to try. They could just go there, and then they're gone. They go there in their little groups. Maybe they got tunnels underground. Maybe that's why they keep them.
Well, you could be onto something there. I mean, maybe that's the insider information that only certain individuals or certain people have. And I mean, very certain people who we may not even be aware of. I mean, I certainly don't think we're aware of anyone who actually has the knowledge. That's just my personal belief. I mean, make of it what you will. I always found this diagram very interesting because the dome at St. Paul's Cathedral, the construction of it, you have the cone within the dome, which is quite intriguing. It's also very similar to the layout of the dome of the Iowa State Capitol. And the Iowa State Capitol officially was built a good 200 years later, and yet there's a lot of similarities with the dimensions, with the layout, with the construction, and just the opulence and the grandeur of both of these structures in many ways. Now, yes, to be fair, St. Paul's is a little bit larger. It's a little bit taller, but you wouldn't be expecting, the biggest corn-producing state, past, present, and future in the United States, to ever even build something that would come close to matching it, even in aesthetics, as St. Paul's Cathedral. And yet you see these similarities when you look at these little diagrams. Now, is this diagram correct? Don't know. I mean, maybe it's just something they're showing us to sate our minds, if you follow me.
Yeah, maybe. That is interesting about the dome inside it almost reminds me, I know it's not the same. People are going to say it's not the same. I know it's not. It's almost like square and the circle in a sense. Like, I know it's not, but like the triangle inside the circle, like some sort of sacred geometry, like when you look at a certain double tetrahedron, it doesn't look like that, but you can see when they interlock. Ooh, that's nice. Wow, that's the floor plan. I can see. Obviously, it's a cross, which is very related to, that one big. Well, there's two big religions, the same thing sort of. But it also, a cross unfolds into a cube. I mean, that's a very deep rabbit hole to get in. It's probably not very safe for YouTube, but yeah, cubes. It all comes back to the cubes, bro.
Well, the other thing that you'll see, you mentioned how the cross, a standard cross, is a reflection of three-dimensional existence because you fold the cross into a cube. But then you also have the more extensive cross that folds into a tesseract or a hypercube. And you'll actually see that on certain churches in rather odd places. And so that's always fascinating to me as well, is that reflecting the actual nature of our reality, the true spatial reality that we operate in, that it's not three-dimensional, it's actually four-dimensional. And suddenly all those theories about the shape of the land, they go right out the window. Well, if it's four-dimensional, that means it can really be anything. Yes, it can be a plane. Yes, it can be a cube. Yes, it can be a planetarium. And yes, it can be all three at the same time. I know it sounds really odd, but that's exactly how a tesseract works in spatial dimension. So is that what's being reflected here? Or is this just to keep us, off on some other tangent? It's hard to say, but yeah, I mean, at least we actually have plans, single perspective plans here.
Yeah, that what you just said reminds me of what I always say, in a way, about the shape of the place that we live. I'm like, I think we render it in as we go, and if it was four dimensional, I think that would, I don't know, I'm not completely sure, but like, would it add that other layer of dimensionality in such a way that things become more energetic? You could almost, because there's manifestation here in this physical plane, but it takes a little while. It can be quick, but sometimes it takes a little while, and it's normally like not, well, there's no limitations really, but is it the case that you're almost manifesting your subconscious beliefs of what you think it is, and because it's a tesseract, there's more energetic possibility to pull that physical event or outcome to you, so that's what you see. It's hard. It's so hard, like, to know.
Well, and I mean, here we look at the cross on the very top of it, and what do we have here? It looks like we have a three-dimensional cross, which is what folds up into a hypercube. We don't have a two-dimensional cross here. This is a three-dimensional cross.
Yeah. Man, it's so deep. God, so deep.
Well, and I think it's that way by intention, and then you look at some of the fine detail behind this. I mean, the construction materials that we always talk about. And remember, this is in the late 1600s that they built this block by block. They assembled all these materials and built this very elaborate and complex dome. And I mean, what's this really made out of anyway? 1600s concrete? Is it made out of limestone? I mean, they say virtually all the state capitals in the United States are made out of some kind of limestone. But what's really the story behind this construction material? Or is it exactly the same? And then, of course, you get down to the columns, and you have the elaborate construction details in the columns. Now, I will say this. It does appear as though these columns are sectional. But who knows if, they had a fire or something, they didn't replace them at some point. I'm not sure. But certain other locations, the columns look to be one piece. So it definitely creates many more questions that there were many different ways to do this. Now, even a sectional column like this, could anybody do this today? Even a single one of these? How long do you think that would take?
Oh my God. In terms of just logistic time, just time for moving it from one location, getting it shaped, profiled, machine, processed, moving it to that location. That's if there's no other places that it has to go. That now, I mean, I sort of like, I speak with a lot of people in construction high up, I know a lot of guys, and the vast amount of time it takes to get like a kitchen door is like 6 weeks just to get one kitchen door. So like, if you think about this, I mean, this is decades. What I will say, just to be logical and just play devil's advocate, is that nowadays we have people in call centers, we have people that are, they're doing random ass jobs, they're stood on the street busking or whatever. Well, that was back then as well, but there was more people to help in these things. Well, we say that, but the population, if you believe it, was lower, if you believe the numbers. So yeah, it's very hard to decide on whether, on what they could do. But what I will say is that everything that I can see now, that obviously there is some wear and tear, there's going to be, but I've never really seen one of these structures with a real, like, one bit where they're, they're like one part of the building where they're like, oh, they had a bit of a bad day, they ruined that bit, it wasn't as good as the rest. It's all exactly how it should be, pristine. And I think that is the reason that we couldn't do that today, because there's not enough people with that level of pride to do it. Now, I'm not saying that they did it. I'm just saying I know that that's a factor as to why we couldn't do it today.
No, I think that's one of the real tells that you just described right there. And I mean, and you look at this portal window here. And I mean, even looking at the decorations around it, the square and the circle, and then the effort that went into this. I mean, I'm just trying to visualize how anybody would have done this in the late 1600s with the implements available at that time. And I'm not even thinking about the logistical feats of bringing in all these blocks and all these materials. I'm just trying to think about how they formed this. You know, are we to believe that they went up there and they carved it? Even if they had infinite labor, even if they had infinite artisans and craftsmen, that they just went up there and, you know, they spent all day carving for 30 odd years that it took them to build this. I mean, even the construction time, you know, I think the 30-year construction time is utterly absurd. And then how did they actually do the foundation? I mean, and there is an extensive foundation. We'll get to it in a second, but all the detail that went into this one structure. And I guess this is really becoming more of an exploration on St. Paul's. And you know what? That's okay, because there's many different ways, and, you know, and no one's looked at St. Paul's. And I really wonder about that because, you know, the structure is featured quite prominently in the film of Life Force, where all the humans that are killed by the vampires, their life force is actually channeled through St. Paul's Cathedral. And then up to the craft above where the quote unquote space vampires come from. At least that's how that film described it.
And I've just noticed something with the window. You said it and it reminded me. Square in a circle. I said earlier, it's not really square in a circle. Well, yes, it is, because I can see it now. I don't know what that means. And there's this this sort of like, I used to be in it. You know, if you saw like anything, you were like, oh, look, that's bad. Look, they've done that there. So that must be bad. You know, I know what that means, but they don't know what it means. Like, I don't know what it means. I just know that it's ultra ubiquitous throughout esoteric society, like with the Native Americans and stuff like that. They, you know, they love this shit. Sorry, bro, I keep swearing. But this is overt symbolism that is covert to blind eyes. So is it? I mean, and they call it a portal. So is it saying that once you square the circle, you open up a portal? I don't know, because I don't think portals are. I don't know. I like the idea of portals, but yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I completely agree. And oddly enough, you see that exact same symbolism when you concern yourself with the different concepts of the old studies of alchemy, the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah.
And the symbol for that, oddly enough, has a lot of similarities. It could be a coincidence, but who knows for sure.
Is it something that is pointing? Because when I think about alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone, I almost think that they are referring to, like, maybe like the pineal gland or the pituitary gland, maybe mainly the pineal gland, but like this. Here's the thing that I always think, like now, or I always think it's like when they were building this elaborate building, if they built it, but when they were building it, they must have had the astral. I know I keep calling it astral. I'm trying to find a better word for it, but that's that's an understandable word. It's like they must have had the astral in mind when they built all this. There's no way that they didn't, because they know, like the big religions, they all know, like at the heart of it all, there is, it's hard to say, but there is the people that built this know that there's more planes of existence than heaven and hell and purgatory. You think there's just three? Like, come on, people, man. Like, it's wild, man. I mean, look at it. Look at the arc. Look how long that must have taken to do, bro. Like, it's crazy.
That's what always gets me about the interiors of these buildings. And I mean, I think that's the most impressive feature. As impressive as the size, the domes, every exterior column, it's really the interiors that I think are the tell, with how unbelievably beautiful, intricate, geometrically precise, all these details that went into the interior that you don't see in any modern structure. And I mean, you don't even see them try to emulate it in any modern structure. I mean, they've got some modern structures where they'll try to emulate the exterior. There's maybe one or two I can think of where they try to emulate it, like the cathedral, the Armed Forces Cathedral that they just plopped up in Russia, and who knows the story behind that. They try to emulate the interior detail, and I think they're trying to do it in that cathedral that they derisively call a God Mall in Bucharest in Romania. That's right next to the Palace of Parliament, or the People's Parliament, the big, huge, genuine old world building that was built in the 1980s, apparently.
Yeah.
But you look and you see this kind of detail, every indentation in all these arches, and every indentation in the decoration in the ceiling. I mean, and that's the same thing that we see in the Art Deco buildings. But nobody could do that, whether it was in the 1600s or the early 1900s. I think that's completely in the realm of impossibility, at least for the history that we understand, that we're given.
Yeah, I would, I'm glad you brought up how geometrically precise they are, because when you go into a place like this, it's like, I know that the square and the compass, they were very precise, these people that we're not allowed to name, but I mean, if you got one bit wrong on the top, you'd be like, it's all got to come down, got to do it all again, literally got to take it all down. And is it a case that these people were so skilled and so patient and so just masters of their craft that they could do this without making one single mistake, or they knew how to repair it so you couldn't see it? I highly doubt that's the case, although they built this massive elaborate structure, so who am I to tell them what they can and can't do? But yeah, I just think about, like, one guy makes a mistake, the whole thing has to be redone, and I just don't see any mistakes.
Well, you think about that when you look up on the inside of any dome, and you definitely see it here. I mean, what are we really looking up at here? I mean, you really see, I think, the original decorative intention behind the dome here of St. Paul's. For whatever reason, this dome has been preserved, because I think a lot of them, they try to denigrate them, especially the state capitals in the United States. They'll paint something else up there, or they'll put something else up there. But for whatever reason, when you look exactly up at this dome, you still have the original design and intention, I believe. Now, granted, I haven't been there in person. I haven't actually touched the interior of that dome, so I don't know for sure. But it does give the impression of something that is far beyond us, and not just far beyond our capability, but even far beyond our ability to conceptualize in our mind. I mean, who in the 1600s would think of doing something like this? Oh, yes, this is going to be this very elaborate dome. It's going to have this beautiful symbol on the inside of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. It's always 8, isn't it? With the two columns making each point behind it. Although you'll see that same symbol that I just pointed out everywhere. I mean, it's not limited to Western or Eastern cultural influences, or as we think of them. It is across the land, which is quite intriguing to me.
Yeah. And with the 8, which is interesting, because cross symbolism, X symbolism is huge. It's everywhere. And I always think, obviously, you turn an 8 on its side, it's Ouroboros, it's the infinity. Is there, I know, like, it could be a symbol of, eternity, you spend eternity in heaven or whatever. I don't think it's that, because they wouldn't have to symbolize it in that way. To put 8 on there so people knew that it was 8, to reference it to, the X, the cross point, the Janus, the point of the thresholds. And that again goes back to the astrals, like that point of the threshold, the hypnagogia, or, hypnopompic, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, those states. I mean, it's not limited to them, but like this point where the veil is so thin. It's not even that the veil's thin. It's just that you're resonating on the same frequency, but not even that either, because you're not really doing, like, when you're in this state, you're just going to sleep. You're just waking up. Like, you're not doing anything in particular, but it's those brainwaves that you're in. Maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's just all of this stuff together. I know I'm sounding like very indecisive and unknown, but you can't really know any of this stuff. It's all just speculation, really. But there's some things that you look at and you're like, okay, that's pretty overt symbolism. And, you know, I take my hat off to you, sir. You know, I'll try and decode it. And that's all we can do.
Well, no, you're exactly right. And yet when you look closer up at the center of the dome, again, you see 8 reflected here as well. 2 components of it. And so, I mean, what is there a significance behind it, or is it just something that somebody thought, oh, it looks really pretty, and you know, it's the late 1600s, and yeah, I know we had the English Civil War a little while ago, but I'm looking to build something that's going to last for hundreds of years. And let's be honest, the Cathedral of St. Paul will probably be the most beautiful and striking building of London for all future history. I mean, I don't see anything supplanting it that we're going to build.
Yeah, I'm just counting those. So there's 16 on the inside ring, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So there's 16 on there, 16 on there. I'm not very good at maths. 16 and 16. So that's 32.
I'm sure that's just a coincidence, you know, just like why we keep seeing 8s and all this, and, you know, 16s and 32s. And, you know, you even look at the little semicircles that are around it. You know, there's 8 more there. Of course, what else would it be?
Yeah. I enjoy looking at that stuff. It's like a head nod, and the actual shape of those square things is a canted square, which, if you know anything about the people that we can't talk about, that's one of their symbols, is the canted square, and there's 32 of them. It's pretty overt symbolism. Well, covert, but overt.
Well, you know, and that begs the question, what really came first? You know, did certain groups see this in all these structures, and they decided to adapt them as the symbol of representation, so there would be an affiliation, when in fact there was not an original affiliation. It was just, how shall we say, subverted, if you will.
Yeah, maybe this group that we can't really talk about, maybe they stumbled across the remnants. They were the first people to stumble across the remnants of these things, and they were like, "Ooh, what does that mean, 32? What does 33 mean?" And then, like, "Oh, we got to preserve this," and then they became who they became. Is it a case that was, you know, maybe Atlantean, maybe, and that, you know, the people that we can't talk about, you know, maybe they picked up where Atlantis left off. Maybe, who knows? Because they say 17, you know, but that's not. Everyone knows that that's not true. You know, that's just the one in the UK, the one in London, you know, and that's just one. You know, it goes way further back than that.
No, I fully agree, and I think there's a lot of inclinations that something like that happened. Now, whoever's behind it or why, that's certainly up for debate and question. So now we go to the tomb, or at least the subsurface below ground of St. Paul's Cathedral, and we have the tomb of Lord Horatio Nelson, the great hero of the Battle of Trafalgar. I'll admit, back when I was into my legitimate historian days, I was actually quite taken by the whole story of Lord Horatio Nelson and the Order of Bath, and I studied the Battle of Trafalgar quite a bit. And yes, he's basically going to be the... would you go so far as to say he's probably one of the greatest military national heroes in the United Kingdom? I mean, one of the more contemporary ones, next to Wellington, of course, Duke Wellington. But I would say he's definitely up there because he actually died in the conflict officially. Yeah,
you got this Nelson's column I think it is in Trafalgar Square, I believe. I'm not a Londoner. I don't like London. But yeah, Nelson. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty revered by the British people. You know, maybe not consciously, maybe they don't care consciously, but culturally, yeah, people love him.
And I think just seeing these details here, I mean, you know, you look at some of these, the reliefs over here. I mean, what the heck does this have to do with naval warfare? I mean, what does any of it have to do with naval warfare? You would think they would have made something, I don't know, maybe the HMS Victory up here or something and actually put him under that.
Yeah.
You know, that's what you'd expect. And I also think about that, and I'm just going to call it like I see it, that very ludicrous monument they have to him in Edinburgh, where it's supposed to be a telescope that's shoved in the ground. How exactly does that make any sense?
Yeah. So
yes, we're going to revere Lord Horatio Nelson by having a telescope that's stuck in the ground.
Yeah.
Because it's a tower that we're just saying it's a telescope. Okay. Yeah, when I did that exploration, I had somebody who was acting all outraged about the fact that I would actually question that monument, because I guess they were there and they witnessed it back in the early 1800s when they built it. Never mind the fact that the national monument for the Scottish fallen of the Napoleonic Wars was incomplete. They ran out of money, but they had the money to build the Nelson Monument. So I guess you don't want to. You don't want to tick off the government that you just became part of with the Treaty of Union, although that had happened 100 years before the Napoleonic conflict. But whatever, right? But call them Scottish. Remember, call them Scottish.
Jeez, man. Yeah, you go deep, man. I didn't even know any of that. That's crazy. Every day's a school day.
Well, it's interesting to me because, on the surface, and I'm not poking fun at anybody. I mean, everybody has a reputation of this immense personal pride for the region that they're from. But I find it intriguing that there's certain events, certain situations that just completely discredit that. To me, it's rather strange that, you have this pride in this particular area, but, well, now it doesn't apply in situation A, B, or C because, Horatio Nelson was just that awesome. So we're going to build a monument to him. And here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's strange how certain, I mean, obviously he was, in the Battle of Trafalgar, and that's very Londony. So I can see why they revere him so much. He's almost like, it almost reminds me of like the Romans when they like sort of deified themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, not saying that he did, but it's like who cares? Like, who cares? It's probably, it's probably covering up some nasty, horrible psyop anyway. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and I think it's something you can't question. It's something you're not inclined to question because there's nothing more grand than military glory. Even though in the United States we haven't had a general who's been president since Eisenhower. That was the 1950s, and you're probably never going to see a general who has any kind of influence again. For whatever reason, they've gone away from that pattern in the United States. They've certainly gone away from it over in Europe. I mean, you're not going to find military leaders who are also civil leaders for whatever reason. Now, of course, there's explanations given to that. But the prospect of venerating past military leaders, that very much continues. It's quite intriguing, especially when you think about what we're looking at. We're supposed to be looking at sacrifice. And yet in the United States, for example, you have this publication called military.com. Half of that publication spends its time dismissing, criticizing, or castigating corruption in the United States military. It's quite intriguing. Very intriguing.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Might get a copy.
Well, you can look it up online. Just look up usmilitary.com and just look at the number of articles that they have that openly call out corruption or misconduct in the ranks of the United States military, especially with the senior officers. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, do you know what? It is interesting. When it comes to the dichotomy between how something looks and how it actually is, especially in these big institutions and big like organizations and industries, for example, because like the industry that I'm in, like not saying nothing, but I've seen some stuff and I'm like, you ain't supposed to do that, but they do it, and it's like, okay, I got to keep my stuff, so I ain't gonna say nothing. But like, especially the military, like Jesus, like they just failed the other audit on that Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight, and the date got moved to that day. So did they know that was going to happen on that day? Blow it over or whatever. And it's the unaccountability of the military is just, I mean, I don't care anymore because I'm out of that now. But for someone that really focuses on it, I mean, you'll never be out of a job if what you do is criticizing the militaries of the world, because it's just rampant. It's just full of weirdos and like authoritarian lizard people for all I care, Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's what's really intriguing about it. How in one respect, it's not only tolerated, it's openly encouraged and done every day. But then in another respect, certain people can't question certain things. So, if you have someone who's in the present, well, okay, military leaders in the present, they give you this impression that they're corrupt. That's what these articles say. I'm not saying that. That's what these articles will tell you on military.com. But then, oh my goodness, if you dare to question a military hero in U.S. history, let's just say Eisenhower or Patton or any of the great World War II generals, or you go back to the Civil War and question Grant or Sherman, no, you're not really supposed to do that. You're going to get frowned upon. It's very intriguing, the overlapping perceptions just with how these people are regarded. And I think there's something to be said with how it reflects in a structure like this. You're not supposed to question this. This is Lord Horatio Nelson. This is like Grant's tomb in New York City. You go there, you pay your respects, and you don't question it. Done.
Yeah. Yeah. Shut up and pay your taxes.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's what it all boils down to. So, well, with that, I really enjoyed this exploration. I think we'll stop right there for now. And this has been wonderful. So thank you for joining us, NMM Podcastio. Appreciate working with you again.
Yeah, man. This has been wonderful. We went super deep. I've been really wanting to get my teeth into something like old worldy, and this really filled the void, man. So I really appreciate you having me on, man. I love coming on the show. You're a great guy. You're a great host, and you make me feel very welcome. I appreciate it, bro.
Oh, well, thanks for being here, and you are always welcome. So, well, with that, this is Lucy Rillian. Thank you for joining us. Please like, comment, and subscribe.